I have so much power.
Todo, viene abajo y balas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our FringeCast episode 5. I think we're on now. Today we're tackling accessibility at the Fringe. So welcome from wherever in the world you're joining us from. Do let us know in the comments. It's always nice to hear where you've all joined in from today. I guess the first thing we should get started with is our introductions. So hi, my name's Alan. I'm the registration manager here at the Fringe Society, which basically means I manage the registration process. Simples. We've got two first-time FringeCasters with us for this episode. So, Lindsay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Lindsay. I'm the Community Engagement and Access Manager at the Fringe, and I look after a team who work out all the different ways people are prevented from accessing the Fringe and what we can do to help them.
And I'm Ray. I'm the Access Projects Officer, and I'm part of Lindsay's team.
Well, part of Lindsay's team, just as a sign-off. And Fringe casting legend himself, Daniel Saunders.
I wouldn't use those words myself.
I can.
My name is Daniel. I'm the Digital Marketing Coordinator here at the Fringe Society. So I look after our social media, our email marketing, and all kinds of other digital and technical things, such as all the tech behind the scenes today. So if anything goes wrong, it is my fault. And if anything does go wrong, do let us know using the live chat.
And Lindsay, we have another guest.
Yeah, I'd just like to introduce Greg, who you can see on the screen. Greg is interpreting into British Sign Language for us today.
And taught me the sign for Hufflepuff, so I've had a great day. Let's get things started. So, Daniel, can you talk us through how should people engage with us today?
So thank you very much for tuning in with us live, or indeed if you're just listening back to this session later, whether it's the first FringeCast you've listened to or you're a veteran of these. We just wanted to quickly run through how these sessions work. So essentially, FringeCasts are live streamed, interactive and unscripted podcasts where we cover different aspects of bringing a show to the Fringe, and then we answer any questions you may have as we go. So they're a bit like a podcast, except we don't have any theme music yet, despite Alan's repeated...
One day.
And as we record these live, we don't edit them as we go. So we often say with FringeCast, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but there are often times where we give stupid answers, but we will try and correct ourselves.
They're like podcasts, but more dangerous.
More dangerous. And also, to help you get the most out of these sessions, we really, really want to hear from you. So if you are watching it live, do get in touch with us using the live chat feature on YouTube. If you're on a desktop or a laptop computer, you can find the live chat in the top right-hand corner of the screen. On a mobile device or tablet device, live chat is normally hidden under a button. You may have to rotate your device to make that button appear. To comment or contribute to the live chat, you just need to log in using any Google or YouTube account. But if you prefer, or it's just easier for you to get to, you can also tweet us using the hashtag FringeCast or mentioning EdFringe. And finally, we are broadcasting live, but you do have the ability to listen back to this session at any time that suits you, and indeed you may be listening to this as a recording. So everything is recorded, including the live chat, which I'll be using to share links and resources to anything these guys tell you about, so you can come back later and have a look. And I guess if you are listening live, we do recommend sticking with us live, because if you fall behind or you rewind during the session, you may be asking us a question that we're currently answering. So we always recommend sticking with us live and then rewinding back later on.
Yeah, we're always pretty confident that we can either get you the answer or have the answer at hand.
Or connect you to the person that can.
Even if we have to go into FringeCast Extra. So, without further ado, access at the Fringe. I guess, as always, it's really good if we establish sort of who we are and what the context of the Fringe is. So we're all sitting here. We work for the Fringe Society. The Fringe has been around since 1947, but since the late 50s, the Fringe Society was formed. We don't govern or run the Fringe in any way. We very much support it and underpin it. We're there to help audiences, but also to help artists. So from Lindsay's point of view, it's very much about improving access across both those fields. Something that's always really good for us to establish early on is that the Fringe is an open access festival, which means it's in no way programmed. So we don't tell you if you can or can't perform at the Fringe. If you've got a story to tell and can find a venue to tell it in, come and tell your story.
You're in.
You're in.
You're in the program.
It also means we are an impartial organisation, so we will represent every single show that registers. We don't have favourites. We treat everyone the same, and that is how the society functions, and that's our role. But Lindsay, you've entered the world of the Fringe in the past 3 years. Why and how?
So, as you've said, it's an open access festival, which the Fringe Society is really proud about. And we're really proud of the fact that anyone who wants to take part can take part. And in the last few years, the organisation's really started to think about what does that mean. It's very easy to say that anyone who wants to take part can take part, but the reality is often quite different. And so my role was created to look at what the barriers are that prevent people from being involved, either as participants or as audiences. And last year, Ray came on board to help us get rid of those barriers. And we also have some new team members who look after relationships with schools and how we can get more schools in Edinburgh involved, and also more people who live in Edinburgh involved in the Fringe.
Sounds like a nice, easy process then.
No problem.
No problems.
Yep. We're going to get there. It's just, it's a big festival, so it might take a while.
Great. So you talked there about barriers. Seamless. It's almost planned. So a festival as big and diverse as the Edinburgh Fringe, I imagine there can be quite a few barriers that you have to go about breaking or
definitely
swerving.
There are many barriers, and we're going to focus today on three main ones, which we want to talk to the people listening about getting rid of and how they might be able to get rid of these barriers themselves.
And so the first one I've just popped up on the screen is a sensory barrier.
So a sensory barrier is I'm so sorry, my mind just went blank there. If someone has a sensory impairment, so they might have a hearing impairment or a visual impairment, and that's going to really, they might be able to get into a venue, no problem. It's not about a physical barrier into the space, but once they're there, the sensory impairment, if there's been no adjustment made for that, then they're not going to be able to enjoy a show or a performance the same way as everybody else. So that would be really things like visual impairments and hearing impairments.
So with the presence of Greg today, we are smashing down a sensory barrier.
Absolutely. So we have made an adjustment here for people who use British Sign Language so they can take part in the FringeCast.
Great. So moving on from sensory, physical barriers, Ray.
So as Lindsay briefly mentioned, a physical barrier could be something like accessing a venue or performance space in itself. So this could be difficult for a wheelchair user or somebody with limited mobility. It could also be something like, for an autistic person, it could be quite stressful to have to queue in a venue before getting into the performance space, as it's such a busy environment. So one way to kind of overcome that barrier would be to allow early entry into a performance space.
Great. I'm just very aware of the next one. It's a word that I very much struggle to say. Lindsay, attitudinal?
Oh, perfect pronunciation. So attitudinal is probably the trickiest barrier to overcome. With sensory and physical, it's kind of about the adjustments that we can make at the Fringe Society, that venues can make, and that companies coming and presenting work at the Fringe can make. But attitudinal is about changing people's minds and changing the audience's minds. Often we'll find that people will think that the Fringe isn't for them because they don't see themselves represented on stages. They don't know, because historically access might have been quite difficult for disabled people, so they'd think it's probably still like that. Edinburgh itself is quite an old historic city, so there's a lot of physical barriers around anyway, so people will think, well, it's going to be hard. They've not thought about me. So attitudinal is really about changing people's attitudes. How can we let people know what opportunities there are for them and what adjustments are being made?
Great. We've got a question that came in that I think is quite interesting at this sort of point of proceedings that came in advance. And it's someone asking about what obligation do venues have to improve accessibility versus the artists themselves who are putting on the show. So where do you stand in that? So someone being worried about like what do I do versus what should my venue be doing?
I think it's really up to everybody to make a change. It's everybody's responsibility. And I would say the Fringe Society's got a role to play in that, venues do, and so do artists. So if you think of your venue should be making a change, it's definitely talk to them about that, find out what they're already have planned. And venues themselves also have a responsibility. And we, at the Fringe Society, we work very hard with venues to help them to make changes as much as possible.
I think one thing that would be good to point out is not to think of it as something you have to do, but look at it as an opportunity, really, because this could be a creative opportunity, but it could also be an opportunity to just increase your audience base.
Some of the ways we described today's session was try to reach as wide an audience as possible, because if, say, some people who could attend your show are unable to because of these barriers, you are reducing the number of people that could come and see your show. So if you broaden the access, you remove these barriers, you allow more people to come, you ultimately have a bigger audience to bring to your show, which is only going to be a good thing.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I can't think of the number off the top of my head, but if we were talking about like a monetary value to this, it is massive in the country, the spending power of the disabled community.
So we've identified some of the three barriers we want to look at today. So I guess next, shall we look at some of the different adaptations people can make to their Fringe shows to make them more accessible and to tackle some of these barriers?
So the first one we've got on the list, relaxed performances.
So Ray briefly mentioned autistic people and the fact that some people might find queuing very stressful and put them off coming to the Fringe. Relaxed performances kind of take that a bit further, and they're kind of primarily for autistic people, but really for anyone who finds the Fringe or being in a space, theatre space, a bit overwhelming and a bit much. A relaxed performance is really about a company saying, we're going to make some adaptations for you and make sure you feel really nice and comfortable in this space. It's not necessarily about everyone just being a bit chilled out. There's more to it than that. When you register a show, if you decide you want to offer relaxed performances, we will ask many supplementary questions in Ed Fringeware about that.
Many. Like your use of many. It's like
a few,
4.
A few. Because we want to give audiences as much information as possible. So we'll ask you questions around what sort of things happen in the show, and that's not at all about spoiling the narrative or the plot for people. It's about autistic people being able to make an informed choice about whether they can actually be in that space. Typically, an audience in a relaxed performance, it'll be okay for them to get up and move around. It'll be okay for them to leave the space and come back in. It'll be okay for them to make noises. And that's all really just things that the audience in a relaxed performance needs to be able to do to be in that space. It's not about them making a comment on the content of what they're seeing. It's about them just being able to be in the space.
And is it fair to say that when it comes to registration, or indeed people talking to us about making their show more accessible, relaxed performance is often one of the more misunderstood areas of accessible performance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Lindsay was saying there, I think people are keen to make their shows as accessible as possible. So when they see the word relaxed performance, I think there is a thing of being like, yeah, sure, like I'd want anyone to come, without actually thinking about, okay, what steps we're going to take to make that happen. The new questions might seem like they're tripping you up a little bit because they're asking you about things that maybe you aren't thinking about, but that's the point. Those questions will tell you what you're not thinking about. I quite often talk on these things about you don't know what you don't know, and actually someone asking you, does your show contain, and then giving you a list of things, which can have everything from like audience interaction to like the use of balloons. It makes you go, oh, hang on, I need to actually think really clearly about the content of my show and what adaptation I'm making.
And it's also being mindful of the fact that when an audience member sees relaxed performance, they've got a bit of an expectation around what they're going to get from that performance. And so obviously it's brilliant if everyone's welcome, but just bearing in mind that if someone sees relaxed performance, they're going to hope that you've made or expect you to have made certain adaptations. And that's why we ask the few extra questions that we ask in Ed Fringeware. But we do have... for all the adaptations we're talking about, we've got much more in-depth advice on our guide, which is on the Ed Fringe website, and Daniel is popping into the live chat.
I am, yes. And just before I do that, this kind of applies for all the adaptations, but it's hard to understand the difference this can make to people's lives. Alan often talks, particularly when it comes to relaxed performances, stories of parents that have attended a relaxed performance with their child. There's just some amazing stuff. Like, it does change people's lives.
Yeah, so like I guess I'd never really heard of relaxed performances until I worked at the Edinburgh Playhouse, which is a venue in Edinburgh, in the Access Bookings team when The Lion King did its first tour out of London, and they'd said they wanted to do their first. They called it autism-friendly performance at the time of the show on tour, and I thought that was a great idea or whatever, but I don't think I'd fully understood the impact of that until we started speaking to people and started taking bookings on the phone. Like, people getting emotional on the phone, like, rightly so, and being like, they'd never been able to experience the theatre all as a family unit, or had that day where they can go and experience that kind of art, but without the pressure of, I've paid loads of money for a ticket and then we might have to leave and not be able to get back in, that kind of thing. And a show as technical as that, seeing the adaptations to the show they made was a real eye-opener to be like, oh, if this show that has like a lockdown of the auditorium and an elephant that comes through the auditorium, if they can adapt the show to make it accessible, it kind of was a big eye-opener to me to be like, actually, this makes a huge impact and can be done quite easily.
So that's kind of the starter information for relaxed performances. Like Lindsay says, I have put the link in the live chat to our guide about helping to make your show more accessible. So moving on from relaxed performance, next up we've got audio description.
Yeah, so audio description provides additional narration during a show. It's normally conducted live rather than an audio track, and it describes what's happening on the stage during pauses in the audio dialogue, like body language, expressions, movements, and lighting effects, things that are important for the audience understanding of the performance. And this is normally for blind or visually impaired audience members. It can also be helpful with those with learning difficulties. There's a couple different ways this can be done. There's like a typical method where the audience members who would require audio description are wearing headsets. And then there's what's known as the integrated method, where it's sometimes performed for the entire audience. This could be like an actor telling the audience about the characters in between scenes, and it describes the situation or provides additional information. So there's a couple of different ways that can be done for this.
So you say that the headset one, is that the case if you have someone, say, backstage or out of the room potentially, watching the show and then just talking to the people with headsets, explaining the action on stage? Yeah,
ordinarily you'll have a trained audio describer who may be sitting in the tech box, usually somewhere away from the audience, because they will be talking at a normal level. but they could be in another room watching the performance on a webcam, so they don't actually have to be in the room to do it.
And there's some really interesting examples of shows when it comes to that, say, embedded audio description where they actually make it part of the action.
Yeah, essentially you just have it's a cast member essentially providing narration as the plot develops.
So there's been a couple of shows in the past few years. One of them was a one-woman show, and she wrote the show herself, and she just wrote a version of the show which was audio described, which was quite exciting. So it was the same show, she just added in narration really, or description of things that were happening that you needed to be able to see to understand what was going to happen next. And then there was a show last year where the audio describer was a character, and he didn't have a huge amount to say. He just kind of interjected with a bit of description of the set, of what people were wearing, and then anything additional that people needed to know. But it was kind of all in the plot, so it wasn't weird that he was suddenly describing what was happening.
If that's the show you're talking about, if it's the one I think you're talking about, I barely noticed they were actually audio describing. It was so well integrated.
And then there's been other shows as well. I remember Ray was telling me about a show where I think the audio describer had a bit of an opinion about things that were happening. Is that right?
Yeah, this audio describer was a character, but not on the stage.
Oh, I thought you meant someone had gone rogue.
No,
I thought you meant
really
this
that
actor
way.
is not producing their best work.
This audio describer, you'd also were given insight to their thoughts. So they would judge the characters on the stage for what they were wearing, and they were
Sounds like my best job.
They were
It's like
playing-
Queer Eye.
The audio describer was cast as a very kind of uptight, privately educated, upper middle class woman.
Less like Queer Eye.
But you say it can be really well integrated into the show. And I think maybe some people may, when they first encounter this, worry that it's intrusive or it's going to detract from the show. But actually, I never said this one, but you think even the work of Shakespeare is pretty much audio described. The dialogue says what is happening. You don't have to constantly say someone has walked. The dialogue can incorporate the fact that
Yeah.
someone has walked in or someone has been stabbed invariably.
But if you do decide to go down the route where you've got an external person doing the audio description, we're really excited to be working with the Audio Description Association of Scotland this year, and we'll be borrowing some equipment from them, which we will then be lending out to venues. So if you are interested in accessing that, then talk to your venue about it, and we'll be sending information out to the venues very soon about that.
So is that equipment like the headsets that people would
the
need?
headsets, the transmitters and receivers.
Yeah, there's two different kinds. So one works for large venues and is a stationary unit, and there's one that is not a stationary unit and could be used. It can be used for walking tours to give you an idea of what you can do as a kind of theatre piece with it. So it's a lot more mobile.
And when it comes to any of these accessible performance types or adaptations, we're here to support you. Your venue's here to support you. But when there are resources out there to make this easier, so we do just recommend them as that first port of call is your venue. But then you can also get in touch with us on the email address equalities@edfringe.com. Lindsay's given me the thumbs up, so I've got that right. And that was just an example of audio description. It was seamless. So you can get in touch with us and ask us about support that is out there, or indeed ways we can support.
Amazing. And next up feels very relevant as we're currently having one. Sound performance.
So when we talk about sound performances at the Fringe, it's a bit of an umbrella term. We mean a few different things, so it's worth highlighting what those are. So a sound performance, in Fringe terms, could be a BSL interpreter on the side of a stage, dressed in black. It's a very traditional way of doing it. It could also be that you have a BSL performer or interpreter who is on the stage, potentially dressed in a similar manner to the cast and shadowing people. They could be cast as an actor themselves. A show that we've already mentioned with the integrated audio description was on at the Fringe last year. It's called My Left Right Foot, and it one of the first people I believe that was cast in that show was the BSL actor. So it was an actor who is fluent in BSL, and she just interpreted everything that was happening on the stage. You could also have a BSL or a signed performance by casting a deaf actor to take on that role as well. So there's a few different ways to do it. And it really just depends on what your show is, what the best way to do it is. It's hard. It's very difficult to kind of say, oh, one way is better than another, because it's absolutely dependent on what's happening in your show.
Great. I know you know of another show, Ray, that was like the cast all learned BSL.
Yeah, so last year there was a show called Sirens, which they cast a deaf actor, and the rest of the cast all learned British Sign Language for the show. Now, they were quite clear that their command of the language was very basic, but as they had written the show to be all the cast members were beginners in the language anyway, it worked quite well.
Great. So there's all these different forms of ways you can adapt your performance. What would your advice, guys, both of you, be for like someone who's trying to figure out, oh, I think I want to do a side performance. Should they talk to someone? Should they do something else?
Well, absolutely, they should be speaking to deaf people when they're doing this. They need feedback to know that it's going to work, but also, consider casting deaf actors in this role as well. That would be the main thing. If we were to give like one piece of advice, it's involve who you want to target as your audience in the process of developing the show.
And I guess I asked that very leading question because I know that actually part of the reason that you guys are very clued up now is that you've spent the past few months talking to deaf artists, deaf audiences to discover what their barriers are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's worth remembering that just as not every single person has the same opinion, not every single deaf person has the same opinion. So what worked for one person won't suit somebody else. Deaf people have their preferred interpreters. And so it's just, make sure you get a good spread of views. But it's definitely probably, if you're going to take one thing away from what we're talking about today, it's just to go and talk to the people that you want to come to your shows and find out what kind of adaptations you could be making.
And what's the best way to get in touch with these groups?
You can do you can have a search on social media. I know that Ray has spent many an hour on Facebook looking for deaf social groups in Edinburgh. You can look for local deaf organisations. There's big charities like the RNIB, which is the Royal National Institute for the Blind, Action on Hearing Loss. They'll be able to put you in touch with local groups. They're also really good for some basic advice on things. And then there's more I was going to say niche, but that's not the right word, but more kind of arts organisations. So organisations like Birds of Paradise, which is a disabled-led theatre company in Scotland, or Grey Eye, again, another disabled-led theatre company in England. Both have loads of resources. Organisations like Solar Bear, who works with deaf theatre makers in Scotland as well. So there's a few different options to go for. And I think Daniel will be putting all of those into the live chat. But you can also just contact us if you're looking for making contact with disabled people organisations. We're always very happy.
Don't know if anyone heard that, but people are literally trying to get in touch with us. That is the phone in the meeting room where we're broadcasting live from. Actually, I think that ties in with a point that is like in FringeCast folklore, because we use it so much, which is actually talk to people who've done it before. Like in all of this, use last year's program is a really great source for research for what you're doing this year. Find the people who are doing what you're doing now, but 1 year ahead. So go through last year's program online. You can see the PDF, which I'm sure Daniel will pop into the live chat.
Yeah, it's there now.
Yeah, where you can look for the glyphs to see who was doing a signed performance, who was doing an audio-described performance, or who was doing the final one that we're about to reveal, a captioned performance.
And if you have a look at our new Access guides, we have in there, we've started asking people to kind of do a bit of a case study for us. How did they do it at the Fringe? So we've been asking companies who've done accessible work to tell us how they did it in their own words. So if you have a look at that part of the website, it will also give you an idea of people that you might want to contact, or just take a look at what they're doing.
Because you'll be able to learn from someone else's mistakes. Like someone will be like, this was great, however, you should probably don't do this because we didn't realise that was an obstacle. Or
And I would say definitely, like in the last year or so, when we've been talking to people, people are really happy to tell you kind of what they've done. And disabled artists and audience are really happy to tell you kind of what they need to happen. Like people are really open, I would say, in this area of sharing what works and what doesn't work.
They're also very understanding if you're a beginner in this. So if it is, be clear kind of that you're giving this a go for the first time, and the audience will completely understand that, and they're not going to think you should be like a 10 out of 10 in expectations.
And the fact that you're tuning in and thinking about this in March is a really great starting point, because there's still the months up until August will fly by, but
yeah, they will.
You're still ahead of the game and still thinking about this early, and people appreciate that you're taking this seriously and you're looking into it, and they'll give as much help and advice as they can. So on screen, we've got the fourth adaptation we were going to cover today, which is captioned performances.
So captioning, it displays dialogue, sound effects, offstage noises in a text format, normally created in a typical method by a trained operator in a similar fashion to audio description, how you did a trained operator there. This is for deaf or hard of hearing people, people with learning disabilities, and it can also be for those whom English is not their first language. So that's a kind of another audience kind of market to think about there. Again, there's different ways this can be done. So when I talk of the kind of typical method, there's open and closed captioning. Open's where there's a captioning unit set near a stage. This could be like on an LED screen, and this is watched by the entire audience, and it's operated by a trained operator. Then you have closed captioning, which is very similar, only instead of it being on a screen, this would be on tablets or smartphones. These can work for different kind of shows. So like tablets and smartphones may work better for more kind of lively performances. Then you also have live captioning, which we had last night at the FringeCast.
So we, for all FringeCasts, if you weren't aware, we run each episode twice for different time zones. And today's session is BSL-interpreted. But yesterday we gave a very first attempt to live captioning the whole session. So we'll be popping that up on our website to check out as well, whether you just want to hear this session again or just to get a feel for how live captioning works, because it is pretty remarkable what live captions can do.
Yeah, another big shout out to Claire, who live captioned for us and managed to keep up with our twists and turns and rambling musings on all things Fringe.
But like it's best suited for an unscripted performance where the dialogue is unclear.
Yeah, unscripted,
you just define the Fringe
completely
cast.
improvised, or where the script changes just every night. So for this, you wouldn't get a trained captioner, you'd get a speech-to-text reporter who's similar but also different. If you need information about where to go for these people, then again, if you come to the Fringe Society at equalities@edfringe.com, we can supply names and places to go to contact.
But you've also talked about these as sort of the professional options that exist where you can go to an expert, but there are ways you can just do it yourself, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to go on the accessible information guide that we put up, there's a great case study by a group down in London, and what they did was they put a one-off expense on a projector and screen for about £120. Then they just need to factor in prep time, so they just use PowerPoint, 2 to 3 lines of script on each slide. They have a member of the company who will just forward each slide as necessary, and they have every performance now captioned.
And like Ray said, they went and hired that, but with anything to do with the Fringe, it's always worth talking to your venue, A, to establish whether if you had a projector you could fit it in, but or B, they have one you could use, or when you're trying to sort out a space. Is there something they can help? When it comes to any of these adaptations, letting them know early that this is something you're interested in will be really, really helpful.
Totally, and just in general, like you might not know that actually your venue's heard from like 4 other companies that week, and actually they've realised there's a bit of a trend, so they want to do something. Like the more your venue know, and the more in the loop they are, the more they can help. It also helps in general if you're talking about accessibility and its sort of widest possible meaning, like about people being able to find your show, access your show, know about what's going on. like actually keeping your venue in the loop to make sure that there's clear channels of communication, so you're not doing something that actually when people turn up at the venue, the staff have no idea what's happening. Keeping everyone in the loop is one of the best things you can do in terms of making sure that access is clear.
So just looking at the time we have, I think that we're going to have to wrap up there on accessible performance types. But like the guy said, we have a range of different resources on our website that explains where you can find out more about these. I have noticed a few people listening live have joined us a little bit later, so I just wanted to say thanks for joining us. And also, if you're watching on YouTube Live, make sure to check out the live chat. So as we're going along, if there are any questions you have about what we've already covered, or just any questions you have in general about accessibility at the Fringe, or just bringing a show to the Fringe, just head up to live chat and pop it in there, and I'll share it with the group. But we're now going to move on to our next topic, which is about marketing your accessible performance, I hope. Yes, it is.
Well done.
Thanks. So I guess the first question, so what, when you've now, you've decided to do an accessible performance, what's the next step in telling people about it?
Tell people about it is the main thing to do. That's brilliant if you have worked with a BSL interpreter or you've got captioning, but please don't expect because you've got that suddenly a horde of deaf people are going to turn up. It's really important to make sure that you get as much information out about your accessible shows as early as possible. Deaf and disabled people have busy lives. They've got jobs, they've got other things going on, and they might not be thinking about coming to the Fringe. So it's really important that you get your information out as early as possible. For something like a BSL-interpreted performance, your audience is going to want to know who the interpreter is and where on the stage they're going to be standing, or if they're part of the action, because that's going to influence where they're going to sit in the space. If it's captioning, again, people are going to want to know, how is it captioned? Is it a screen that I need to book? Is it a screen that's open for everyone to see? Is there a certain side of the space that I need to sit in? So just getting as much information out as early as possible is really important.
And not necessarily treating it as like add-on in your sort of broader show marketing. One example we think of, I may have just stolen what Ray was about to say, but on your flyers, what would you recommend, Ray?
I mean, yeah, include everything on posters and flyers, standard marketing, and market the accessible performances at the same time, because deaf people and disabled people will go to the theatre, will go to shows with people who are not deaf or are not disabled. And also, we've not really talked about the importance of word of mouth at the Fringe yet. So people will see things, they will tell people about it, and the prime example, I think, from last year's Fringe would be, again, My Left, Right Foot, of how an accessible show that marketed itself as a standard show and an accessible show, the word of mouth just spread throughout the whole festival about that, and it was very successful.
Word of mouth is everything at the Fringe.
Yeah, like we can't stress enough that actually still, no matter like every form of social media out there, whether like word of mouth is still, like we hear, the biggest contributor to why someone will decide to see a show.
Well, I would say this because I look after the Fringe social media, but I'd say that social media is a part
Fuels
of
it.
that
Yeah,
word of mouth.
absolutely.
It's that people hear what the next hot ticket is and they talk about it and they share their experience, and that encourages more people to go. So if in all your communication, like Ray says, you're making it clear when your accessible performances are, or indeed your whole run is accessible, that's going to help for all your audience.
So
I personally, I love going to caption shows because you pick up so much more, you pick up details you may not have noticed.
See, I'm as the room knows, but our listeners should too, I'm a little bit obsessed with musical theatre, and actually I really love a musical that's captioned, because when something's like really lyrically quick, it's really good to like pick up on anything you might have missed. Speaking of social, Daniel, you're the world of social media to me. To put you on the spot a little, you're in charge of the Fringe social marketing channels. What do you do from our side to make things more accessible?
So there are a couple of really straightforward adaptations you can make to what you're sharing on your various social media channels that can then also help people with additional access needs. So also on the simpler end, for example, if you're using the Twitter app or twitter.com, if you add a photo, you'll see a little icon pop up that just says ALT for alt, so it's the alternative text, and you just need to use that to describe what's in the image, and you need to describe it quite literally, so people can understand what what's in the image. So if it's a standard photograph, such as what we've got on screen, you'd say a performer against a black background wearing a blue denim-style shirt holds up a homemade piece of cardboard like a television, which he's placed his face through. You just describe exactly what's there, as particularly if you're posting a picture of a flyer or a poster. Just writing out what's on there means that people using screen readers or for whatever reason can't see the image can still get an understanding of what's there. Moving sort of down the spectrum to things that are slightly more complex but not super time consuming. If you are shooting video, whether that's just quickly on your phone or whether you're editing it through a computer, there are tools and apps available to help you caption that and subtitle that. And this is invaluable for people with hearing impairments who won't be able to hear the audio of the video, but also, speaking from experience, I think you can all think of times where you're on your phone, a video starts playing, you're not wearing headphones, you're not going to play sound aloud, but having the captions on that video means you can still understand what it's saying. So that's just two of the examples of things you can do. But it's just thinking about if someone can't see this or someone can't hear what we're saying, is there still a way that they can access what we're sharing?
Yeah, there's definitely other formats to consider as well. For instance, if you are doing a show which has British Sign Language, make a video clip featuring British Sign Language. That's the target audience you're going to go to. The deaf community, predominantly, that is their first language. So if you have a BSL performer as part of your show or a deaf actor as part of your show, you could just do something on your phone and put it up on social media. There's also software that you can download for free where you could create audio flyers that you could advertise your audio described show. You would want to include your standard show information, a synopsis, interpreter names, character lists perhaps, anything the audience would need to know about the show and things you think will pull your audience in.
And a lot of these adaptations are really simple, and they maybe you're looking at your show for 2019 and you're thinking, these adaptations are great and I'd love to be able to do it, but I can't quite make it work for 2019. You can still make these changes in how you market your show or how you communicate to at least help communicate to a broader audience.
We've also got what Ray was talking about there with the BSL trailer or the audio description clips. There's room on Ed Fringeware. So if you're doing an audio description performance, if you let us know and you have an audio description clip, we can add that to your listing for you.
And this is another example of where you can come and ask for advice and help.
Definitely. We are also really pleased to be able to make BSL clips for people who have a BSL interpretation or a BSL signed performances. If you let us know, if you make sure that's kind of all done and dusted and confirmed and registered in Ed Fringeware by the 13th of May, and we'll be making clips which kind of give people a brief synopsis of the show and all the booking information. And a key thing to also add into your BSL, if you've got BSL shows or any shows, is our access bookings information. That's all available on the access page of tickets.edfringe.com, which Daniel's going to add to the live chat. But it's also really useful to include text message booking, which just means that people who they don't want to deal with a lot of text, they know what they want to see, they can just make their whole booking, including their payment, by text message. So including that number on there, if you have BSL shows, is also a bit of a good thing to do.
I guess that really neatly links to our next talking point, which is some of the other ways we're here to help you. And our access bookings team is one of them. But what are some of the other things we're here and able to do for people?
So we mentioned earlier that we will have the audio description units, which we'll be lending out to venues. We'll also be lending out a mobile captioning unit to venues. So please speak to your venue if you're interested in accessing either of those. The information will be going out to venues very shortly. And with both of those, the captioning and the audio description units, we will be providing a bit of budget to help pay for those for describers and captioners.
We also list all accessible performances on Access Scottish Theatre, which is a website run by Birds of Paradise. And this is a resource that is used by a lot of members of the deaf and disabled community to find accessible performances, not just at the Fringe, but throughout the year. We also, last year and this year, had sensory backpacks. These are predominantly for people who find the the Fringe to be a stressful environment on a sensory level. So a lot of autistic people would borrow the backpacks last year. They include ear defenders, fidget spinners, stress balls, and cuddly toys. And they were just one way we were looking at assisting audience members attend performances.
The cuddly toys are only there for the children, although if an adult really wants them, they can have them.
I have one.
I guess just be aware if someone's got one of the backpacks, they might have ear defenders on in your show. They might be playing with a fidget toy, and those are not things that they're doing because they want to be disrespectful or they don't want to be there or involved in your show. They're have the ear defenders and fidget toys to help them be in that space and remain in that space. So please don't worry or get annoyed if you see people wearing what looks like. So ear defenders, if you haven't seen them before, they just look like big headphones big wireless headphones, really.
So the third topic on the screen is the marketing resources and tools and tips we offer performers. Alan, do you want to speak a bit more about the service we offer there and how we can help you?
Yeah. So the Fringe Society ourselves, we have a media team who within that have the sort of marketing and media advice strand. So media advice at edfringe.com, which I can see Daniel is typing away into the live chat feed, is one of the services we'll be doing FringeCasts in the future, focusing specifically on that. But basically, we're here to help in any form of your marketing. So actually, if you're looking at how to spread the word, or it might be like how to pitch the synopsis of your show, or like write a press release, anything, we can help with all of your sort of marketing needs. And sometimes it's just having that sounding board to bounce your ideas off. When you get too close to your project, it can be really easy to just see all the tiny minutiae of it, but not see the big picture. So actually checking in with someone who can go, actually, I think this is your unique selling point, it can be a really useful.
And we're obviously going to put a wee plug in here, but we do have, in future episodes of FringeCast, we have specific sessions focused on marketing a show and social media, and we'll talk about accessibility in them, about how you can promote the accessible performances you may have. And finally, on how we can help assisting audiences, I'll just take this one. So if you haven't explored it yet, on tickets.edfringe.com, or the Fringe app when it's released, or the Fringe program when it's released, has quite clear information about the accessible performances that exist. So when people either contact our access booking team or just themselves are going online and starting to filter what's on, they're able to identify which shows have captioning, which shows are signed, which shows offer relaxed performances, so they can help find them themselves. And that's just one of the ways we assist people.
So that's how we help. Who else can help?
So a few of the companies that we mentioned earlier, Solar Bear, work with on Create Deaf Theatre, Birds of Paradise, a disabled-led theatre company in Scotland, Grey Eye, a disabled-led theatre company in England, big charities like the RNIB. All those organisations are really helpful and worth a look. And please get in contact with us if you're struggling to find people to talk to, because we'll be really happy to do a bit of research for you.
I see funding as a point there, and actually one of the questions we had beforehand is someone just wondering how much budgeting should they do around making their performance accessible.
That's a really good thing to think about. It's important to think about budgeting for access as early as possible, and getting it in there as a key component. Maybe around, I could say a number like around 10% of your budget, but it really depends on what you're trying to do. Something like a relaxed performance is going to be quite low cost because it's about changing your performance, but not necessarily bringing in anything external. With BSL interpretation and captioning, it's more difficult to say. It's kind of useful to remember that with BSL and captioning, the bulk of the work is going to be done in the preparation. And so to maximise your costs, it's good to have more than one show. It's good to have more than one show for many reasons. People like word of mouth, especially within the deaf community. People want to see something and then recommend it to a friend rather than they've got one shot to see it and that's that. But it's also, if you have more than one performance, it'll spread your cost out more as the bulk of the work's being done in the rehearsal room.
Of course, if you don't let the financial side scare you away from doing this, if you think you really want to do this, but you don't think you have the money to do it, then if you have the time to do it, that's just as important and valuable. We've mentioned some of the DIY ways you can do this. and those don't cost that much money at all, if anything at all.
And when we spoke about barriers, right at the start, we spoke about physical barriers. And a really simple way to get rid of physical barriers is to find a venue that's step-free, or a venue that will let you do 1 or 2 shows in a space that's step-free. And so you're not necessarily going down the route of the accessible performances that we spent some time talking about, but you are removing a major barrier for a lot of people at the Fringe, which is just by getting rid of any steps.
So we've had a question come in, which may link to this section, or to the section on what we can do to help you, or indeed who else can help. So Steve Garrett has asked, do we have any tips to make a music show more attractive and useful for blind or visually impaired people? So is this one that we can support with, or who do we recommend talking with to get an answer? It's a really good question.
I think is really, and this is something we've already talked a bit about, but it's really important to talk to your venue about it, so that they know what you're doing, and chat to your venue about what assistance are they going to be able to give the audience when they arrive. Because I think in something like a music show, it's really about, once it starts, the experience is kind of going to be more audio. So it's more about what assistance can you give to audiences who are visually impaired when they arrive.
I think we could give, again, as an example, last year, My Left Right Foot was a musical, and it had audio description by one of the characters in between. But as Lindsay said, once the music starts, it's the audio that's important here. So.
And then beyond that, I think it's sort of recovering some of the other advice we gave about doing some further research with, I guess in this case, the RNIB, and then just reaching out to local community groups you may have, just to ask like what would help, just to get a sense.
Absolutely, invite people along to your rehearsals.
Also, to play my registration card just one more time, because that's my bag, we've added 2 questions into the form this year, which aren't necessarily about adapting your performance, but about the general accessibility of your performance. So one is about how accessible is your show for a blind or visually impaired person, and then how accessible is your show for someone who's deaf or hard of hearing. And those questions are about without any adaptation. So like if your music show is absolutely accessible to someone with a visual impairment, you'd be able to tick yes to that. And that's something that like our great access team, access bookings are able to filter by. So we wouldn't make we can never recommend certain shows, but one thing we can do is help filter people by their needs or their requirements.
So just looking at the clock, we've got about 6 minutes left. So it's nearly time to wrap up. So if you do have any burning questions for us today, do pop them in the live chat. But if not, there are ways you can get in touch. But before we talk about that, we're just going to run through some top final tips from the team.
So the top tip is something we've said quite a few times: involve your audience, whether that's involving deaf and disabled professionals in what you're creating or speaking to potential audience members. Don't wait until you get to Edinburgh to do it. Talk to people who are local to you and get their feedback as early as possible.
Yeah, it's important to try to announce your shows as early as possible. Now, everybody would like to be able to plan as early as possible, we know this, but for deaf and disabled people, it might take that little bit extra planning. For instance, some people may only be able to attend a show with a personal assistant, so you'd have to factor kind of that into it. So yeah, just try to get everything booked as early as possible. And as we mentioned earlier on, for instance, if you could confirm with the Fringe by May the 13th all your BSL information, then we would make a BSL clip for you.
And another good reason to get everything confirmed as early as possible is there's not as much choice for people that are looking for an accessible performance. So they don't have, if you're here for the full run of the Fringe and you're doing one BSL show, they don't have the full run of the Fringe to catch your show. They've got one shot. And people have jobs, people have busy lives. Think about when your show is going to be on. We didn't mention this earlier, but think about some of the feedback we've had from audience members is like a Tuesday morning is not going to work if you've got a job and a family. Maybe a Saturday evening would work much better, and that means they can go out with their family to see something. So think about when your shows are going to be on as well.
Also, yeah, tell people how you are making your show accessible. So we've mentioned earlier on, this could be for a BSL show. Is it a BSL interpreter or a BSL performer or a deaf actor? If it's a BSL interpreter, where are they going to be standing? What will they be wearing? Just for captioning, will it be on an LED screen? Will it be on a tablet? Or will it be integrated captioning? So it's just making the audience aware as possible of how you're doing it, because, as we've said already, some people like one thing, other people like another thing.
And then finally, talk to your venue. So those are kind of the two top things, really. Talk to your audience and talk to your venue. Make sure that your venue knows what you want to do and what you're planning to do, because when the audience comes into your space and you're in control of their experience, that's brilliant, but they have to get into your space. So if your venue knows who to expect, they can make some adaptations as well.
And that piece of advice is pretty universal across your whole Fringe journey.
Yeah, absolutely critical. I'd say I did my own Fringe show back in 2011, which was both terrifying and joyful all at once. And actually, I think a lot of the success I had that year, I can attribute to the fact that I had a really great relationship with my venue, in the sense of, like, if they wanted something, I was quick at replying to emails. So then it created a really nice discourse. So, like, if something did go wrong on the day, which things inevitably do, like you're doing a month-long run in a venue that may not be a permanent one, things will happen. And actually making sure there's good communication there means if there is ever a little slip, it becomes a conversation rather than a confrontation, which is nice.
So I think, just looking at the time, that's pretty much it for today. So if you're listening back to this at a later date, obviously you haven't had the ability to talk to us through the live chats, but you can get in touch with us through the various different means on screen. Obviously, I've put social media there because I'm very biased, but do head to edfringe.com/access guide, which is in that live chat, or email us on equalities@edfringe.com with any questions you may have.
Yeah, and final plug. Do I have time for a final plug, Danny?
Yeah, you do.
We have upcoming FringeCasts. So this Thursday, we're got a really exciting one. We're going to be talking about fundraising with crowdfunding experts Kickstarter, joining us live from New York. So that's 6 p.m. UK time on Thursday, the 28th of... What month are we in? March. We're still in March. So that's coming up this week. And then others that are going to be confirmed in the diary soon. We're going to be talking about parenting the performing arts and the sort of the challenges around that, and how you can sort of balance being a parent and being a Fringe performer all at once. And then, as Daniel was talking about, like a really strong focus on marketing, telling the show, making the most of your time at the Fringe. Now, hopefully, a lot of people are going to be getting registered.
And if you've been watching live today and you booked through the email sign-up form, we'll be sending out a really, really short feedback form. We'd love to know how you found this and ways we can improve. Like Alan said at the start, we've only been doing this about a year, and every session is a new adventure. We've never incorporated BSL interpretation before, so it'd be just really great to know how you found it and if there's any way we can improve future sessions. There's also the ability to add in questions that you didn't have a chance to ask, and you can give us an email address to reply to. And also just to let us know if there's anything you wish we cover in future episodes.
Yeah, we're pretty malleable. Like, we're open to suggestions, and we want FringeCasts to be relevant to what artists are thinking about or worrying about or interested in. So let us know.
So that's about it. I think we just go back to the different ways people can get in touch. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to everyone in the room. Thank you to Lindsay. Thank you to Ray. Thank you to Alan. And thank you.
Thank you to Greg for all the lovely interpretation.
I feel like Greg is at a marathon session. We've got to.
We'll make him a nice cup of tea.
Yeah.
And finally, I just love the BSL for Slytherin is amazing. See if you can spot that. So we hope you can join us again. Join us again for a future session in the live chat. I've just popped in a link to how you can sign up to future sessions. But thanks for joining us, and we hope to speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.